Ladies and gentlemen, Violet Games here. Today, I wanted to give you some early game tips for surviving the Give Me God of War difficulty within God of War. I got some general leveling principles as well as some outside tips on how to get through this game the most effective way that you can. So first off, let's get into the leveling tips and principles. So let's just do this up until like the first two upgrades for the Leviathan axe, and go as early as possible. So when you're upgrading, the first upgrade you should purchase in this game is Executioner's Cleave. This is extremely useful, not only for early game, but for late game as well. This attack is always useful as it seems to stun almost every single enemy in the game, regardless of their level. So even if the enemy over levels you, you can still stun them and knock them back using Executioner's Cleave. It's an extremely effective ability. It's absurdly strong. And oh my gosh, I could not get past a gauntlet early in the game because I did not have this. Basically, it was where Atreus breaks the bridge because he rushes off in front of Kratos, and you're stuck basically in a pit of death surrounded by Draugr. However, with Executioner's Cleave, I was able to knock the majority of the enemies off the cliff, even when they would go enraged. So Executioner's Cleave is extremely essential. Furthermore, you can punish downed enemies, stunned enemies, and the like with Executioner's Cleave as well. It's just an extremely powerful ability, and you can even finish enemies off with it. And furthermore, it's really good for the early game bosses. The bosses are very susceptible from this attack. When you punish the larger ogres or trolls or giants, I don't know what they're exactly called. I don't know my Norse mythology that well. Haven't been paying attention to Atreus' journal, unfortunately. But Executioner's Cleave has helped me win those fights as well. It's just a really, really strong ability. So next upgrades I recommend you getting are all of Atreus' abilities that are available basically from the get-go. So you definitely want to get this perk and this perk, that being teamwork and ferocity. Do keep in mind that acrobatics isn't viable until Atreus gets upgraded for the first time. When you go near the Golden Bridge, that transitions you between the realms. Once you do that, the game will actually prompt you telling that Atreus is more confident in combat, and then you can purchase acrobatics. But I recommend you basically purchase all of his abilities because Atreus complements any playstyle. Like, he really, really does. Even on the harder difficulties, it's nice to have Atreus performing well. Now, when it comes to the shield combat, I'm still experimenting with it myself, but a few abilities that I found to be really, really useful is one, I think that countering blast is really nice to help do additional damage to projectile spammers. In the early game, projectile spammers on the God of War difficulty will kill you so many times if you are not prepared to deal with them. So I recommend that if you get a lot of XP early on, you could invest in things like Concussive Blast. And also, an ability I found strangely useful as well, for a lot of reasons that Executioner's Cleave is useful, is Shoulder Barrage. Though I don't fight with my shield that often, when I do, you can interrupt almost any enemy in the game using this attack. It has a lot of stunning power to it, and if you just want to like keep interrupting an enemy with Shoulder Barrage, it's definitely viable. In fact, there is an actual ogre encounter. I think that is either an ogre or a troll, for fuck's sake. But literally, you'll know what I'm talking about when you get to it. The fun fact about that guy is he's really hard to beat if you have trouble evading his ground pound. However, there are two ways to really beat him. One is to cheese him with the axe by sprinting around the map and just throwing the axe at him. And two, you can actually use this ability to keep knocking him back repetitively ad nauseum. And he literally will get stunned every time you do it, even if he is charging you. So keep in mind that Shoulder Barrage has a lot of stun potential and can interrupt enemies' really powerful attacks, some of which can kill you instantly. So I highly recommend that one as well. So those are just my early leveling principles. One principle that I think is really easy to keep in mind for when you are progressing a little bit later into the game, though, which I'll share with you, and I'll probably do videos on in the future, is that it seems that heavier attacks with the Leviathan axe are just way more useful than the lighter attacks. So it's nice to use lighter attacks to get as much damage on an enemy as possible, but when it comes to stunning enemies, heavy attacks are 100% necessary. So avoid things like Frost Rush, because Frost Rush is basically a useless perk investment. Why? Because one, it costs 1,000 points, which is a decent amount of perk points, and two, you can get Leviathan's Fury, which by the demonstration itself shows you it's a much better talent. So I think the no-brainer upgrades for Kratos during any level are levels that promote this style of fighting that causes this massive amount of stun and knockback, because it allows you to knock those difficult enemies off of cliffs, which is absolutely essential for getting through difficult mobs. So that's really all I got to say for early game leveling tips. Also, once you get your first axe upgrade, this is really nice because it helps you destroy ranged enemies, which, like I said, are the bane of your existence in early game. They're so prevalent, and their projectiles like never miss. They're like fucking Kobe O'Brien on steroids, just like constantly throwing shit at you, and getting rid of them as fast as possible is definitely necessary. So those are my leveling tips. Get Executioner's Cleave, focus on the boy after that, then transition into these skills and kind of pick from these. And then once you get the first Leviathan axe upgrade, I highly recommend Freezing Burst. I need to experiment with this one though to see if it stacks up with Freezing Burst, so that'll probably be my next level up actually. So just to give you a rundown on leveling principles, that's the way I like it. Now, when it comes to other tips that are going to help you survive universally, a lot of people in their gameplay tips have not mentioned this, but there's a few things in your settings that you need to adjust in order to do the combat in this game effectively. And if you don't do them, you are not going to be as effective as someone who does. So first off, we have our camera. You need to run a higher sensitivity on both of your axes. Now, I'll let you choose between whichever, but I'm rocking on 8, and I don't need to quick turn ever. I have never quick turned in any of the fights in this game. It has never been necessary, and the reason is because I'm using a higher sensitivity, which is going to allow Kratos to rotate better. So I don't need to press anything that makes me quick turn. I can just turn around myself organically and sprint to avoid damage, and also sprint and roll. But you see, I don't really need a lot of assistance turning my camera. Also, turning motion blur off is going to prevent you from losing sight of your target, from being disoriented, from being nauseous, so I highly advise you turn off motion blur as well. And the final thing in your settings is, if you want to be as strong as you can in combat, and I know not a lot of people are going to jive with this one, but you need to go to your video settings and say favor performance. What this is going to allow you to do, I think if you're on a pro, I'm not sure if this works with the PS4, but it's going to give you more frames of animation. And giving you more frames of animation, guys, makes your reaction time so much better. You will land so many more parries, and after playing on this graphics mode, I don't know why I'm struggling with this. After playing on this graphics mode for a while, I couldn't go back. I tried to go back to the 4K version because it was like prettier, but it's just not worth dropping that performance on the Give Me God of War difficulty. In order to have you perform as optimally as possible in combat, you need as many frames as you can get. Yes, it does dip. Sometimes when you're fighting a bunch of enemies and shit's crazy, the frame rate will dip a little bit in this game. But having 50 frames is still preferable than to having 30. So I highly recommend that you use the performance mode over the 4K resolution mode if you're trying to take on the hardest difficulty. I think that is going to be ignored a lot because a lot of people are saying you should avoid the performance mode altogether. But what I will say is it dips more in the open world, but less in, like, for example, this realm has dipped almost not at all. So do keep that in mind. I think performance mode is way underrated in God of War, and it will help you out exponentially in combat. Anyways, guys, this is Violent Games signing off. I hope you learned something from this video. It kind of took on a more of an informal ramble, but I wanted to give you guys something for God of War, because this game is going to be hard for me to cover simply due to the fact of how long it is. This game has so much content. It's an absolute masterpiece. Like, I can't stress that enough. It's amazing. Violent Games signing off, and if you enjoyed, subscribe to join the gaming orchestra. We're having a wonderful time. We have nice people in the comments section. We also have Xbox fanboys. They're funny as hell. I love Xbox fanboys now. They say the funniest shit, really.